Welcome to a very special Friday edition of the CK Podcast here on the Basketball Zone YouTube channel. I'm your host, Leo Beers, and we got my man, my brother, Robert, back from retirement to come talk about this exciting news of Kevin Durant potentially joining. That's right. Woj reported this. They're lurking. They're going in there doing their thing to try and get Kevin Durant, man. That would be amazing. That would bring a lot of excitement to the country of Canada and excitement league-wide, man. How you doing, bro?
I'm good. I just want to clarify that I'm like Jordan in '96 returning from retirement,
Okay.
not Jordan in 2000. Still got a few peak years left.
You still got some peak years left, man. That's awesome. Yeah. So there's a lot of movements today, lots of transactions. The biggest being Rudy Gobert getting traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a ton of picks. We'll break down the entire deal right now, but just your initial thoughts on that before we get into the rest of the stuff.
My thoughts changed when I heard about the picks, right? So initially I heard the report. I didn't know that the picks were unprotected. There's 3 of them that are unprotected. The Walker Kessler thing is interesting because I didn't understand that pick when Minnesota made it. I didn't understand how the hell he fit. And now I get it. Now I understand that was part of the pitch. So basically you've given up 5 first-round picks for a guy that a lot of people said didn't really have value, almost had negative value, right? Now, obviously that was overstated, but this is an incredible amount of picks and shit to give away for Rudy Gobert, who I like Rudy Gobert, but on a team that's like really ready to contend. So I don't know. I think it'll depend on how they fill out the rest of the roster. Is D'Lo on the move? Like, there's a lot.
It's pick number 2023, 2025, 2027, all unprotected, and a top 5 protected in 2029. And they get Walker Kessler. Wow. That's a lot, right?
It is an
great value amount for the Jazz, though. Oh, man.
Yo, honestly, like, that was the craziest thing. It's like Danny Ainge is just so good at doing this, and he always finds a team. He always finds a team that's desperate, that thinks they're ahead of where they are.
But
right?
It's a new GM though. It's Mike Conley from the Nuggets, who like just took the job in Minnesota a few weeks ago. Hell of a GM, right? Well respected, did a great job with the Nuggets, and he comes in here and he's like, you know what? I'm gonna do this, and you're just like, wait, what?
Okay. I thought he was overrated.
Oh, okay. Well, it's Tim Conley. My bad.
I really feel like he was overrated. He picked up the pieces when Masai left, right? And what's his hit rate, right? Okay, he batted 100 in the draft, picking up Nikola Jokic in the second round, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. That's amazing, right? But he's also had a ton of misses. Aaron Gordon, that was him. Rudy Gobert trade, that was him. He traded Rudy Gobert away initially. It was a 27th overall pick. He traded that pick away. There's been a lot of misses there too. This is not Sam Presti, Masai Ujiri. I think this is a level below. And I think you just saw that. Because when great GMs bump up against good GMs in trades, they usually get a fleece. And this was a fleece. I think this was a fleece of a trade. I'm not saying that Rudy Gobert isn't amazing. He's amazing, right? I think putting him next to KarlAnthony Towns somewhat diminishes a lot of that value.
I agree.
Especially when you consider how much of the paint that Anthony Edwards needs. Just putting this giant rim clogging big in the middle, I don't see it. So unless, now one thing I was thinking was, what if this is part 1 of a 2-part move where the next shoe to drop for the Minnesota Timberwolves is that KarlAnthony Towns or D'Angelo Russell are on their way out for something that fits a little bit better, because right now you've depleted your depth. You basically have 6 NBA players on your roster, right? If you considering Naz Reid, this is not a championship contender here, right? Rudy Gobert does not vault you into championship contention unless Anthony Edwards becomes like prime Michael Jordan next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So If the move now, here's a crazy one. Would the Nets be okay with something like Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant for D'Lo and Cat plus some picks? I don't know if they have any picks left. Oh, right, they just gave away all their picks. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
that's
But it's like,
interesting. I haven't even thought about that. Wow.
you know what I mean? But D'Lo is, I think, overpaid. But KarlAnthony Towns is a legitimate franchise center, and I don't know if you're going to get much more than that right
So
now
you're
because
saying KD to Minnesota? That'd be wild, bro. that
yeah,
would be wild.
because that's the only way this really makes sense for you, right? Because you need spacing. You have Rudy Gobert in there, and that's great for your defense. That's great for your paint defense, right? And you have Anthony Edwards, which is like your number one offensive engine, and that's awesome. But if you don't do something else the rest of your roster, well, then I'm sorry. But basically, Anthony Edwards is like Donovan Mitchell light right now, right? He's not better than Donovan Mitchell right now. I
No,
don't care how good
no,
he is. And Rudy
he's
Gobert, we
not.
just saw that team get bounced in the first round in the exact same conference you're already playing in. So you can argue that, okay, well, KarlAnthony Towns is going to be like this really, really great, player for you, to be like that second option next to a star, and that's something that the Jazz just didn't have, right? But for me right now, that's a very top heavy team with pieces that just don't fit. And we talked about this yesterday. About you were like, hey, just put talent on the page, and I'm very big proponent that players have to fit together, and they shouldn't pull shit away from each other. And having D'Lo and Rudy Gobert, it's a messy situation. This is not
I'm
the
just not a
roster I
fan
would
of
want to
like,
bring.
but like context to that. When I'm saying add, they're adding one of, let's be honest, one of the worst players offensively in the league right now. I mean, this is a Rudy Gobert that can't stay on the floor, a Rudy Gobert that Donovan Mitchell refused to pass to because I think his percentages within like, I don't know, 7 to 17 feet was just disastrous. This is a player that hasn't improved like offensively inside the paint with like no post moves. This isn't like a
Right.
player like I'm saying, let's put DeJounte Murray on the Kings. Like this is a player that's phenomenal, historically, top defender, but he's truly unplayable in the playoffs. So, yes, get as much talent as possible, but my God, like they gave up their entire team and picks, and I'm like, like when I see the Hawks move, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense to me because those picks will most likely be anywhere from 15 to 30. And
Right.
these picks, like you said, like I don't know. I'm just not a fan of this move.
If I could go back in time, like two picks plus D'Angelo Russell for DeJounte Murray makes you better than whatever the hell you just did here, if provided that San Antonio would take that offer. I mean, look, this is a GM who has prioritized the center spot. KarlAnthony Towns is historically great as a big man shooter. There is still some space on this roster, right? But I just think that the penetration that you need with a guy like Anthony Edwards, some of that is negated with having a guy like Rudy Gobert. Now, I also think that Rudy Gobert's problems on defense in the playoffs, which have been massively overblown, in my opinion. I've seen it, I understand it, but so much of that comes down to schemes and whatever the hell else is around the Jazz roster. Because I see a guy like Robert Williams who's not great at switching. Okay, he's not a great perimeter defender. He's good. He trails. He can drop, but he's a drop big, right? Kevon Looney is a drop big, and
Hmm.
those two guys were just in the finals. And I guarantee you, no matter how passionately, if you're a viewer out there and you feel really passionately about Rob Williams, everything Rob Williams does, Rudy Gobert does twice as well. Okay, paint protection, rebounding, everything. He's just better, bigger. He's just
But Rudy
it,
Gobert costs you like $200 million plus.
right. And Rob Williams is a steal, right? And but hey, like skills scale on a premium curve. Okay, like you can say like a guy who's a scorer. If the guy is a 2 times better scorer, he's going to cost 5 times more. Two
Sure.
times is a big thing. So top, because it's basketball. This is not football. This is not, a team where this is not soccer. This is not like when you have 11 guys on the court. One guy can make an enormous difference. We saw that with Kawhi in Toronto, right? So one guy who can literally take your defense single-handedly and move it up 10 spots, that guy might actually be worth $38 million. My only problem is, if that was the Charlotte Hornets that had swung the exact same trade, that's a great trade. But that's the Minnesota Timberwolves, and that's a very different situation because your roster around him is different. So I'm curious. I don't want to jump off the wagon
Yeah.
and start, saying like
Yep.
this is the worst move ever, because
It's
the
not
truth
over
is
yet.
we haven't seen the rest of it, right?
Right.
You have a lot of assets, not draft capital anymore, but you have assets as in the form of, frankly, two franchise players in KarlAnthony Towns, and I mean, we're arguably talking about one of the top three young players in the NBA in Anthony Edwards. I'm not suggesting you move him, and I don't think they would ever move him. But KarlAnthony Towns, this is a guy who can bring you back more than what you just gave up for Rudy Gobert in a trade. His trade value is higher. So if Rudy Gobert just got you this, who knows what KarlAnthony Towns could get
It's
you?
funny though, because all these, I would say the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of like stars get moved, and I feel like it's been underwhelming in terms of the value that some of these teams receive. And now today, when I saw the deal for Rudy, and I'm like, is this just Danny Ainge just pulling strings, or like I just feel like it was a lot for him?
It is
And
a
does
lot.
that set and like does that set the market? Is my question.
If that sets the market's going to crash, because no other GM out there is going to pay that, right? I
No.
mean, I heard through the grapevine some of the offers that were out there for Rudy Gobert, when teams were offering
Right.
scraps and a couple of picks. So okay, here you've given up, I think, serviceable role players. Okay, Jared Vanderbilt was a serviceable role player. This is a player.
He's
I mean, when
stud.
you really look, if you really want to break this trade down from the Jazz perspective, when we look back on this 3 years from now, I will guarantee you they netted about 7 to 8 first-round picks out of this trade, because Patrick Beverley will soon be an expiring contract. They'll probably be able to flip him for a longer-term contract and a pick. This is a team that's just adding picks. Like, they added a pick for Royce O'Neal. Just a little while ago. And you know what? For everyone saying that the Jazz are about to full on tank and they're going to drop Donovan Mitchell, they could also go the other way. They could completely go the other way, and they could take all of the picks and all of these, assets and all of these contracts and flip it right now. Find me a team that can offer more for Kevin Durant that's willing to, do that. And it's like Donovan Mitchell and Kevin Durant and veteran minimums. I mean, is that going to make you a championship contender? No. But are you further than you were last year with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and that weird fit? Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's a
It's
perfect segue.
interesting.
That's a perfect segue because I feel like KD is holding the market right now for these next moves, like the Timberwolves, the Kings, like all these teams that have all these pressures to either win the playoff series or make the playoffs. Like, these are desperate teams. And right now, Kevin Durant is holding the market hostile. And Adrian Wojnarowski reported that the Toronto Raptors are lurking into their, I believe they have the right assets to get this deal done. My good friend Mark Jones, he was the one that was like, hey, don't sleep on Messiah. Like, this dude's done it before. And then when that happened, then like Woj came out, and you were just like, what the? I know you and Kane have been talking about that for a few days now, but let's talk about some of these proposals that you got for us. And I'll pretty much set it straight. Like, from an outside, from like a non-diehard Raptor fan, I'd be like, okay, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, look, context. KD's one of my favorite players.
Sure.
Honestly, if you asked me 3 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, who's your favorite player in the NBA, I would say Kevin Durant, right? But right now I have a new favorite player, and there's no way in hell I'm moving off of Scotty Barnes in any trade. So I spent a lot of time last night combing the grapevine, talking to every source I could imagine who was in the New York media area, because I know the Raptors wouldn't leak any of this, and I just wanted to know, is it possible that the Nets are looking for a player like that back, right?
They
And
are. So Mark Spears reported that they're looking for an up-and-coming all-star, a young starter, and a bunch of picks and swaps. That's a lot. And after seeing what Rudy went for, no other team has what they're asking. It just sounds like the perfect partner is the Raptors. But both you and I can agree that I wouldn't let go of Scotty Barnes. It'd be more of a
Right,
Pascal Siakam,
right,
Pascal Siakam type of deal, and I'd go from there.
right. So I lost a lot of sleep last night thinking about this because Scotty, kind of did a LeBron where he posted something and then deleted it real quick and then had the entire world going like, what did that mean? What does he know? He posted a picture of him and Durant playing, right?
They all
And
did
it
it though. I mean, like the number one pick did it, and like everybody was shooting the shot.
right. So I was immediately like combing through my sources and I was asking like, is there a chance that the Raptors are dangling Scotty Barnes, right?
Hmm.
Because this has happened before. I mean, never with a player quite of this caliber this quickly into their contract. But I mean, the Raptors, I mean, in the past have dealt a top end. I want to call it top end, but a rookie who performed very well, and they've dealt him like that next offseason. They did it with Charlie Villanueva, who finished second in Rookie of the Year voting. They traded him literally the next offseason for TJ Ford. So I was curious about that, and so my source, who I'm not at liberty
Yeah,
to name, but he did say that Brooklyn would like players like Evan Mobley from the Cleveland Cavaliers or Scotty Barnes from Toronto, but that initial requests from that from their side they have been met with no from both sides. So it does not feel like Toronto would be willing to let go of Scotty or that Cleveland would be willing to let go of Evan Mobley. And those two feel right now like they are untouchable for both franchises. So moving on from that, and I want to say like from the Nets side, I wanted to think about this from both sides. Like, why would you want Scotty Barnes? Look, Scotty Barnes right now, for everything that he is and everything that he will be, is not a better player than Pascal Siakam. If you are the Brooklyn Nets, okay, you need to win right now. You absolutely need to win right now. This entire Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons thing, it's just unless you're dealing all three of them this offseason and getting really good assets back, like you have no picks. You have pick swaps and picks guaranteed to from the James Harden trade for the next 4 years. Which means
hmm,
that if you suck next year, i.e., if you choose to go for Scotty Barnes as opposed to Pascal Siakam, first of all, Scotty has more value than Pascal Siakam. Okay, so you're not
sure.
getting as many picks back in that. You're getting contract fillers. If they want a package centered around Scotty Barnes, there will not be another major asset in that trade coming back because Kevin Durant is 34 years old. He's coming off a season where he's just played 55 games. He was not that great this year. It was probably his worst season ever. Um, in a long time. This is one of his worst seasons ever. Like I was looking at the analytics. It was not a great season for him. He just coming off a really bad series against the Boston Celtics. So if you're talking Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes, I got to be honest, there's not a lot else coming back because those two guys have a lot of value around the league. Okay, so if you're the Nets, you're pretty much batting on one of those two guys and Ben Simmons to lead you to the playoffs next year, which honestly is crazy. They're not going to be able to do that. You don't have enough around them. So if I'm the Nets and I'm talking to the Raptors, I'm starting this conversation with Pascal Siakam. Number one, pretty much a really good roster fit. Can conceivably fit with Ben Simmons because he can space, he can shoot,
Hmm.
right? He's younger than Durant. He makes less money than Durant, but not so little money that you have to take on a whole bunch of extra stuff. You can probably pack in a trade exception into that by gapping it, right? The Raptors would go right into the luxury tax, or they wouldn't go into the luxury tax, but they would come close to being a tax paying team in that situation. And you could probably extract a couple of first round picks. So you would be talking about a package of Siakam plus maybe Flynn and Kem Birch and a few couple of first round picks, maybe 2023 unprotected and then 2025 top 10 protected or something like that. I think that would be a trade where the Raptors still have enough on their roster and Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., the new signings of Otto Porter Jr., all the depth is still there. Scotty Barnes can
I
just
think it would
seamlessly
have to
step
be
in.
like OG, Siakam, and picks.
I think that's a non-starter for me, and I'll tell you why. Okay, like I looked at the numbers, right? So I mean, let's be real here. Kevin Durant is going to be 34 years old. I understand that he has a lot of value, and that value is going to be there for certain teams. But that value is not going to be there for the Raptors if they have to deplete their roster to get him. And if you have to give up Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby in order to get him, plus you have to give up your future, I'm sorry, you're not winning a championship with that team. You just can't. Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., and Kevin Durant and Scotty Barnes, that's not a better team than the one that just got swept last year with Kyrie. Sorry. Kyrie and Bruce Brown, I mean, hypothetically, that is a worse team than you just had. Okay?
That's if
Kyrie
you're
Irving
not
is a way
projecting
better player.
Scotty to be what he's supposed to be, though.
Yeah, but he's not going to be that right now. He might be 2, 3 years away from that. And by that time, Kevin Durant is going to be 36, 37 years old and probably demanding a trade. My point is, if you have to give up both OG and, I mean, look, there's a lot of depth on this team, okay? Now, there's a lot of depth and quite frankly, a lot of redundancy. There's Otto Porter Jr., who just signed. There's Thaddeus Young, Chris Boucher. There's all these role players. There's Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet. There's like 9 guys that I seriously think could play on every single team in the league. Every single team in the league. Chris Boucher is a rotation player on every team in the league. Gary Trent Jr. plays on every team in the league. Otto Porter Jr. was just like a part-time starter for the current championship team. There's a lot of depth here, and I like that. I like that there's a lot of depth. It means that you can swap 2 pieces or 1 big piece for a guy like Kevin Durant, right? And a couple of those ancillary pieces and future assets. So I think that the Raptors have so it's either going to be, in my opinion, it's either going to be Siakam plus some, scraps, young players, whatever you want to take on. Maybe a Banton, maybe,
I don't think
maybe
that
there's
gets
a.
it done.
I mean,
Honestly, I
and a couple of firsts, but the truth is, like, you got to look at it from this perspective, right? What is Kevin Durant making over the next 4 years, right? And what is his value if there are injury concerns? I mean, he's had lower body injuries, he's had an Achilles injury. Like, we are not talking like initially when he demanded a trade, everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is going to be an Anthony Davis level package." Anthony Davis was 26 years old when he demanded a trade, not 34. That's a very big difference. Like, you were talking about a guy who is approaching his
But
prime versus
he
a guy
had
who's
a
2
lot of
years out of his.
injuries as well, though. Like by the time he was 26, he was always
He,
injured.
he didn't have an Achilles tear, and that's a very different type of injury, and that's
Sure,
an
but he
injury that
missed
has
a
been
lot of
known.
games, though. By the time he was 26, he missed pretty much half of his career. I mean, that guy
That's
did
not
not
true.
play.
That's not true. That's
AD
not
did
true.
not play a lot, though.
But the last season that he didn't play, it was mainly because he was asked to sit out. He wanted to play, but they wanted to make sure that he didn't get injured because they were trying to trade him. So that's a little bit overblown. If you look back on his seasons, he had quite a few healthy seasons with New Orleans and quite a few nicky-nack injuries, but nothing as serious as an Achilles tear. Just to put this into perspective, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the last 3 years played 44 games together. 42 or 44 games together. It's 42 games. They played 42 games together. So that's what you're batting on here. You're talking about a guy who missed a year and a half. Okay? A year and a half of the last 3 years. And all of the star appeal and all that stuff. This is not Kawhi Leonard, my friend. And I gotta be honest, Siakam is much more valuable around the league than DeMar DeRozan was. Has changed, but Kawhi Leonard came for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a first for Danny Green and. So I don't see how you get to OG Anunoby plus Pascal Siakam because you're basically gutting your team. It's too much, and I'm not saying it's too much in a vacuum. It's too much for the Raptors to be giving up.
I mean, that's fine. Like if that's your perspective, I respect it. But if you're trying to elevate this team and have like a Kawhi type of a season and win a championship, this is what you do. Like these are
He's
the
not
risks.
Kawhi.
These are the
He's
risks that
not,
you got to take, though.
but he's not Kawhi. He's miles below Kawhi as a defender right now. He's on the wrong side of 30, like way wrong side of 30. I'm not saying that he's not going to be worth what he's
I mean,
being
they've said
paid,
that about LeBron
but
James for a long time. LeBron James is still a top 5 player in the game.
LeBron James is not a top 5 player in the NBA right now. He could be potentially if he really gets it together. He will not be a top 5 player in the NBA next season. You think he's better than
Yeah,
Giannis,
but he's
Jokic,
like almost 40 though.
Embiid?
But I know, but he's been playing
No,
at
he's not.
such
He's
a high
36.
level. Huh? But he's been playing at such a high level
LeBron's
for such a long time that they keep talking about age, but like KD's game doesn't revolve around being athletic. Like KD is smooth. He's the best scorer in basketball.
Okay,
Like
he's not the best scorer in basketball. He's not.
who's
You know, you're
who's
talking
the
about a
best scorer
guy
in
who just
basketball?
got shut down by
When he's
who's the
healthy,
best
he's the best
scorer?
scorer in basketball. Who do you want the ball with 5 seconds left?
You don't think Steph Curry is a better scorer than KD right now? Right now?
I'm not talking about like prisoner of the
I
moment.
mean,
I'm just saying if you want the
I'm not
ball in
talking
someone's
prisoner of the
hands,
moment.
like for sure, I
Well,
want the ball in KD's hands. Like, I
dude,
mean, what are we
see, this
saying?
is look, I consider this like a ghosting effect, right? So I think there's times when a guy shows decline, right? And I'll be honest, if you look at the history of the league, that decline, it's quick. It doesn't happen over like 6 years like it does in a video game. It happens like literally in one summer, and the guy's not the same player anymore. We saw it with Harden. We've seen it with Russ. Russ went from a guy who was a borderline ineffective star to a guy who's like one of the 50 worst players in the league right now in a summer. It man, I'm telling you, man, it's like a lot of these guys, they rely on, like, look, I watched the Boston Celtics
This ain't
guard
James
Kevin
Harden.
Durant.
Like this ain't James Harden, brother.
I mean,
He's
you're
not.
talking.
He's not. This is a 7 foot shooting guard who is arguably the best scorer to ever live. Like this is Kevin Durant we're talking about.
Yeah, but this is also basketball we're talking about, and the game is played on both sides. So if Kevin Durant, the next iteration of Kevin Durant over this contract, is going to be a guy who can't guard the way that he's been able to guard in the past, right? Now you're talking about a guy who's like notches below on defense. If you're talking about a guy who can't play, who can't stay healthy, I mean, we're not talking about a guy who's coming off like 3 straight seasons of playing 70 plus games. We're talking about a guy who hasn't played 70 games in a season in 4 years. So, like, I'm not saying this to sound like I wouldn't want the Raptors to trade for Kevin Durant, or that I wouldn't swing for the fences with Pascal Siakam or something like that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of risk for a team that isn't ready to
Sure.
absorb that type of
There's a
player.
risk for anything. I mean, they took a risk in getting James Harden, and they were an unfortunate injury away from Kyrie getting hurt in Game 4. Like they would have won the
Like,
championship that year. Like
here's the thing.
it
Here's the
happens.
thing. The Raptors fleeced the Spurs on the Kawhi deal. Okay, so just like with Danny Ainge, I think this front office is extremely measured. They don't trip over themselves. They don't overestimate themselves. They're not stupid. Okay, if this was 2 years from now, like, let's build a time machine and pretend Scotty Barnes is 2-3 years further into his career right now, and you're really like one step away from a championship right now. I think they might even overpay for Kevin Durant. I think they might let go of, because with that core of a 28-year-old Fred VanVleet, a 23 to 24-year-old Gary Trent Jr., a 24-year-old in his prime Scotty Barnes, and Kevin Durant, now you're a championship contender, right? But
This
if
guy
you're
said
talking,
Van Vliet, Gary Trent, Birch, Flynn, and 2 firsts.
well, see, this is the problem, right? Because it's like, if you're not including Siakam, right, in the deal, and you're trying to build a team, build a package around Fred VanVleet or Gary Trent Jr.
That's
Well, then
laughable.
now, it's sort of laughable, because every team in the league would beat that offer, because every team in the league would offer that much at the very minimum, even if they're capped out, even if they don't need them, they would offer that just for the asset. So it's like, if you're building a package around Fred VanVleet, I think the other problem is roster fit. Who the hell are you playing at point? I mean, this is a team, the Raptors right now, that have 11 players that are between 6'7" and 6'9". And even if we can trick ourselves and believe, that Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam can play point guard and spot minutes, this team really has like one or two point guards in Malachi Flynn and Fred VanVleet. And everyone just wants to throw both those guys away for a forward. Then I have questions about the roster construction around Kevin Durant. Look, for the Raptors to do a trade, this is a big reason why Danny Green was included in that Kawhi trade. They don't like to make they don't like to make bad gambles. They like to make gambles where there's a really, really, really good chance.
So you're saying it's not going to happen?
I'm saying if it did happen, it would be a move around Pascal. And I'll tell you why. If most, it would be like Pascal plus Gary for like Seth Curry and Katie, and they'd give up a few picks in that exchange, because in Seth and Gary, you give up the better player, and then you know it, there's a value to that, and the reason I say that is because, like, from the Raptors' perspective, you have to know that if you get him, that the next 2 years are both title contention years. You can't worry about 3 years from now, 4 years from now, because he might demand a trade by that point. But you need to know that the team around him right now is competitive enough that you can compete with Boston, Golden State, etc. And I don't think that if you gut this roster and give up OG, Siakam, Fred VanVleet, like, I don't know if you give up two of those guys that you're going to do that. Now, if the Raptors weren't so high on Scotty Barnes, easy. Package Scotty plus picks, maybe throw in Gary Trent Jr., take back Seth Curry.
How upset would you be if that's the final deal? Scotty and
Bro,
picks.
I told his mom yesterday, I'm moving to Brooklyn. If that happens, I'm moving to Brooklyn. I'm done. No, man. You would have to be insane to do that. Like, look, even look, I discovered this with the Raptors, right? Like,
do they win a championship? They might.
It's possible.
They might.
I mean, so that's a hella talented team, right? If you have Pascal Siakam and Kevin Durant up front, I mean, you solve like Siakam goes back to being like the best second option in the league, right? Kevin Durant is like still a top 8, top 7 player in the NBA right now, if healthy. And Pascal and Fred VanVleet's an all-star. If you can get, and you have all these other pieces around them that are depth pieces, and if you can keep, one of Gary Trent and OG, you have a solid fourth starter there too. Yeah, I would say you're ahead of a lot of teams, provided that his health holds up, provided that he doesn't fall off a cliff athletically. But it's like the thing is with Kevin Durant, he does take care of his body. He loves basketball. He's obviously chasing another ring. I do think this is a situation which is not going to mirror, James Harden or Russell Westbrook, but and because of his size and his shooting, etc. But that doesn't mean that he's getting better. It definitely means he's getting worse. And so last year, I mean, if there's analytic nerds out there, he gave you eight win shares last year in 55 games. Yeah, pace adjusted for 82 games. That's awesome. That's superstar level production. But for context, he gave you half as many wins last year per the estimates as Nikola Jokic. That's how far Kevin Durant has fallen.
So you're not doing it Pascal, OG, and picks?
No, because it's not worth it. I just don't think you have enough around them. Like, I love OG. Like, if it's OG and Trent and every pick for the rest of your life, you swing it, right?
Yeah, that's not happening.
But I understand from your perspective why you say this, like that's the value, right? But Pascal is not a scrub. Just because he plays in Toronto and because he was a 27th overall pick and he wasn't this hypey prospect, he doesn't have the same perceptive value as someone like Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum even. Jason Tatum or even Jaylen Brown sometimes, and people who are on the fringes of the NBA or maybe follow other teams, they're like, who the hell is Pascal Siakam? But GMs know that he was a top 20 player last year. He may have been voted a top 15 player, but that's a top 20 player. And you're trading him for a top 10 player. Okay? It's not like you're fleecing them. I will guarantee you that Pascal Siakam is, based on the players who are not eligible to be traded, based on the fact that they have Ben Simmons on that rookie extension, Pascal Siakam is the best single player you're going to get back if you're the Brooklyn Nets. There's not fair. One other player in the league. Exactly. So if you're the Nets, you can look at this and say, okay, we're gonna bat on upside. We're gonna take a younger player who maybe has a little bit more value, or maybe we're gonna take two of those guys. Maybe we're gonna take a Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton package, right? I don't know if those two guys together equal the value of Pascal Siakam right now.
I'm making that trade though. Like if I'm Asai and Bobby, I'm making the Siakam and OG and picks, swaps, whatever they want to get KD in there with Fred, with Scotty, and this is me believing in what I believe in, which is Scotty taking that next step. If I don't believe it, I'm not making a deal. It's that simple. And the way you're, and no disrespect to you, but like you're kind of retracting on that because you spent this whole summer, end of last year, talking about how good Scotty's going to be, yada yada yada. And now you're like, well, he may not reach that. He may not be there. So like now
No,
when it's
it may
time to
not be that
actually,
next
wait.
year.
So like now that it's time to actually make the move and be like and be firm on what you believe in, like philosophically, you're kind of like, well, let me hold back a little bit. If this was 2 years from now, maybe. Well, you have to stand on your sword, just like Draymond Green always talks about. Either you believe it or you don't believe it. And if you believe it, it's time to make that deal because KG's getting older. So that's the reality that we're facing right now. KG, as you said, is 34 years old. You either make the deal now or you don't make the deal. And I'm telling you, that's what it's going to take to get KD. It's going to be at least Siakam and OG. It's not going to be Siakam and picks. It's not, because that billionaire owner needs to make the playoffs for Brooklyn because they gave up so much. Like, you have to understand their perspective and how they're going about this. They got a headache in Kyrie. I don't know what the hell they're going to do with that guy, but they got to get as many good players as possible if they're going to get rid of KD. And that's just the reality of the situation.
I'm not giving you my solution for your problem, though. Okay, there's another part of this that we haven't discussed, which is, of course, the perceptive value, like what I would call market value for a player. Now, obviously, they can drum up KD's market value by getting offers that are really competitive from teams. But I'll tell you that there are not a lot of teams in this league that can absorb a guy like KD and not have it be a problem down 1 year from now, because he's not wanting to go to a team that's not willing to contend. And if you're a team that's already contending, if you have to scrap your entire roster and every piece that you have,
that's not your entire roster. We just talked about depth. Like, they got Otto today.
Pascal,
like,
yeah,
I mean,
Otto Porter is 29
Otto
years
can
old.
replace theoretically can replace OG for like spot minutes. Like, it's
Okay.
not crazy because like you just got a lot better and a huge upgrade with KD for like both those guys.
Okay,
Theoretically,
so
like if injuries don't, obviously injuries, I mean, that's part of the game, but
right.
you become a better team, period.
So here's where I'm on this. The Raptors had what I would call like a contention cycle, which started with We the North in 2014, where Kyle and DeMar, and then they kind of built up this program with depth and development, etc. And then around 2018, 2019, as they saw that their best player, which was Kyle Lowry, was edging 31, and that he wouldn't have much more time to contend, they swung for the fences. They took a huge risk, in my opinion, and they traded their franchise player for a guy who definitely did not want to be here and was going to leave in a year, and they probably knew that. And they said it's now or never. But the inside part of that was they really just wanted to get off DeMar's money. That's something that never really came out, but I know that they were just regretful that they had signed this guy, and they were just not happy paying him that much money for the next 3-4 years because they just didn't think that he was going to earn that contract, and he really didn't. So
it's a great risk. That's
exactly
risk.
It. So the point there was that they traded a guy that they didn't really want to pay, right, and a young player that they really liked in Jakob Poeltl, but wasn't their starter, right? They traded a backup big and a player they didn't want to pay for a risk on a 26-year-old who was a top 5 player and a top 2 player the last time he played. That is a very, very calculated risk, and one with almost zero downside for the Raptors. Worst case scenario, Kawhi leaves and you hit reset, you get off DeMar's contract, you gave up a pick and Jakob Poeltl. That's really what you gave up. And you take a chance in Kyle Lowry's prime. That's a very different type of move than doing this now. This would be, right now the Raptors are what I would consider, if you wanted to compare it, they're exactly kind of where they were in 2014, 2015, where they're on the start of something. This is the start of something. You're not contending, in my opinion, KD or no KD, you're not contending until Scotty turns into an all-star and a top 20 player, which, no disrespect to Scotty Barnes, he is not a top 20 player right now. He's not a top 40 player right now, okay? Now, he may become that next year, but you haven't seen that yet. You haven't seen that version of him. So you're banking on a guy to go from probably a top 70 player in the NBA last year, top 80 player in the NBA last year, which is what Scotty was. He was an above average starter. You're expecting him to take a jump to where he's going to be Kevin Durant's running mate for a championship run for the next 2 years. Look, I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility. I wouldn't put anything past Scotty Barnes. Scotty Barnes can come out next year and average 24 points per game. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. Okay, but Scotty plus Kevin Durant is not getting past the Boston Celtics. So if you're gutting your roster, and you are gutting your roster, Pascal Siakam is an all-star and, frankly, a third-team All-NBA guy who, by the way, if Pascal Siakam, the version that we saw after the All-Star break, we're talking the last 45 games, okay? If that guy plays a full season, he's second-team All-NBA. I guarantee it. Look at his numbers. He was like 27 to 28 points per game.
You don't have to tell me on Pascal. I'm a bigger Pascal fan than you are. I'm just saying, like, he's right there in terms of you have to offer him. Now, what if I switch it to Fred VanVleet and Pascal for KD and, you know, Seth and someone else just to match salaries? Yes, you make that deal, Robert. Come on. What are we saying right now?
I mean, we're saying that your roster. Look. I want to tell you this. Like, I don't give a shit about the value of Kevin Durant, because if you get Kevin Durant and you're not a contender, he's not happy. You don't understand that. Like, that part of this is very important.
That puts pressure on you guys to actually go out and become contenders.
What? You can't just you can't just. This is like how the Lakers think. Okay, how you're talking is how the Lakers think. They think we just get some guy. He's really good, and then we'll just put pieces around him, and it'll all work out. Look, if you've got your roster and you've got your future assets, right now the Raptors are in the golden opportunity. Let me put it for you this way. Let's say, for instance, the Raptors play this thing out, okay? They have Pascal Siakam. They have all these young players. Let's say one of them hits. Let's say this year Justin Champagnie comes out and he's like the best role player off the bench for you. Or let's say Gary Trent Jr. takes a huge step. Or let's say OG Anunoby finally puts a season together where he's so great. Where are you next offseason? You still have all your picks, and now you can possibly put a competitive package for the next star who comes on. But guess what? Now you have one of these assets that you're banking on in the future who's actually actualized. They're actualized value.
There's a lot of what ifs there, bro. There's a lot of what ifs there.
But you know what? If you're the Raptors, I think you know your players better than anyone else. Okay, you know what Scotty Barnes is. You see him every single day. You see what factors have held someone like OG Anunoby back. You can see what the trajectory is, and I just think that the Raptors don't trip over themselves. Okay, I don't see, like, look, if the Raptors end up offering Fred plus Pascal Siakam to the Nets, they better be getting some elite role players back with Durant, because that roster of what Gary Trent Jr., OG plus Scotty, how is that a contender? How the hell is that a contender? That's worse than the team that just got swept in the first round. Kyrie Irving's a really good player. Seth Curry's a really good player. Patty Mills is a really good player. You don't have those players. You don't have anyone on this roster right now. Right now, Kyrie Irving is better than every player on the Raptors in terms of talent, and he is better than all but one player in terms of impact. Kevin Durant just got swept in the first round.
But you always talk about being a two-way player, and you know, Kyrie doesn't play defense.
Kyrie doesn't play defense, and that's a really, really big part of what the Nets, you know, but the Nets did not get beat because they couldn't guard the Celtics. They got beat because they couldn't score on the Celtics. They couldn't score. Kevin Durant was horrible. He got stopped by Al Horford. I don't know if you watched that series. I watched that series, and I watched my favorite player get clamped by a 36-year-old power forward that everyone thought was washed 2 years ago, okay? Clamped. Couldn't move. He was getting bumped every time teams stopped this guy. You need players around him. This is not 2012, 2015, where Kevin Durant could just come in and he can just score 35 points per game no matter what you have around him. You need pieces around this guy. You need depth in case he gets injured, because right now what we saw with the Brooklyn Nets is they almost missed the freaking playoffs because he got injured, because they didn't have anything around him. And he's going to want out. If he's not contending, he wants out. So if you're the Raptors and you mortgage your entire future, you've got your team, you give away your two best players. And by the way, I don't know. You and I probably disagree on analytics, but the analytics would tell you that if you give up Fred, who is the analytics darling of the NBA, by the way, he leads everything. He's like up there, like in conversations with Nikola Jokic in terms of like as a point guard, in terms of one of the most impactful two-way point guards in the NBA when he's healthy. You give up that guy, plus you give up Pascal Siakam, that's a pretty lateral move in terms of impact on wins. Now, is that going to make you a better playoff team? Hell yeah. Kevin Durant in the playoffs, isolation scoring, that gives you a better chance in any series. But you have to get to the playoffs, and you have to get a decent enough seed that you're not fighting an uphill battle on the road the entire series. And you have to have some depth in place so that when Kevin Durant inevitably misses 30 games, that you don't end up slipping out of the playoffs and ending up in the lottery. And by the way, giving up picks that you don't have anymore. You see what I mean? You can't risk it all for a 34-year-old like this unless you have the pieces around. If Miami wanted to trade Jimmy Butler right now for Kevin Durant, first of all, the Nets say no to that. But secondly, that doesn't necessarily make them that much better. It doesn't. Is Kevin Durant a better player than Jimmy Butler? Hell yeah. But like, you're going to have to give up so many picks and probably Tyler Hero in that trade that it's going to be a lateral move. And within 2 years, you're going to have the older player who's making more money. It's just, I mean, Jimmy Butler's on a nightmare contract himself, but I just think that teams that they mortgage the future for the present. And I have never seen the Raptors do that. You have never seen the Raptors give up more than one pick ever in a trade. More than one first-round pick. You have never seen it, ever. They're not one of those teams that do that. There are all these teams out there that will give up like 2 first-round picks. Look at what the Boston Celtics
How many championships do they have?
1.
That's why. How many championships do the Kings have? None. That's why. That's my point. You got to be able to take risks, brother. And KDs don't grow on trees. It's that simple. Whether we hate or love the Lakers, and I hate I mean, there's no one that hates the Lakers more than me. I respect them because either way, they become relevant one way or another because they're out here trying to win championships. That's what they do.
It's such a stupid way of thinking that.
And they won the championship, whether it's a bubble championship or not. They still won the championship. I mean,
because
it's not easy. There's one winner a year. There is one winner a year, and the Lakers won it in 2020.
Okay. So, let's compare that. So the Lakers swung for the fences for Anthony Davis, and they got one championship out of it, right? They gave up everything they could for him. They gave up 2 former lottery picks. They gave up 2 rotation pieces. They gave up every draft pick they could, and they got Anthony Davis, okay? Now, that's a great example. The Raptors also swung for the fences, and quite frankly, for a better player in Kawhi Leonard, they lost him in a year. They won the championship that year. Now, think about where the Raptors are today.
They would have won the championship the following year, too, if he would have stayed.
They probably would have. But my point is...
That's my point. So you swung for the fences, and you got a player. So that's what you do.
But okay, now let's consider the point here that I'm making is that the Raptors, because they are an intelligent group, right? They didn't do what San Antonio probably wanted them to do. They didn't. Like I was privy to like what those negotiations were like, and there was a standstill for like, honestly, it was for days that they were sitting on that. You know, are you willing to include multiple firsts for Kawhi Leonard? And they weren't willing to do it. They just said that the risk was too immense that he would leave, and that they would have to give up these picks that might be lottery picks. And they were right, because the pick that they just got that they just used on Scotty Barnes, the 2021 pick, would have been included in that trade. That's what the Spurs wanted. They wanted 2029 and 2021, plus Jakob, plus DeMar. And they wanted them to eat a bad salary. So that's what I'm saying. The Raptors did not mortgage their future. And what happened? They were able to tank. They were able to replenish. They had their assets. They developed.
But they had no leverage because Kawhi hadn't played a damn minute like in over a season.
They still had leverage. The only thing that was robbing them of their leverage was that Kawhi had made it so publicly known that he only wanted to play in LA. But for a team like Boston, which, you know, they had explored, they had walked around, New York had explored, Toronto had explored, there are a lot of teams, you know, and it just so happens that Bobby Webster had a really, really, really tight contact in the San Antonio office, and then he was able to broker that deal together. But that deal was dead in the water because of San Antonio's insistence on multiple picks. So my point is that the Raptors didn't mortgage that. Now consider where the Raptors are today. They're one of the brightest young teams. They just made the playoffs. They're anchoring all of their hopes around 4 players, 5 players who are all under 30. This is just smart management. Now, if you had traded 3 first-round picks for Kawhi Leonard, I'm sorry, you don't get Scotty Barnes, and you're not in a position today to trade for anyone, right? You're stuck. This is what I'm saying. So look, you are praising a team like the Los Angeles Lakers for staying in the news cycle and being relevant because they swing for Russell Westbrook and because they gave away their entire future for
That
Anthony
was
Davis.
fucking
Which
stupid. I did not
okay,
praise
yes,
that.
but they swapped what for Russell Westbrook? What did they give up for Russell Westbrook? They gave up three players that really weren't that impactful. Montrezl Harrell is super overrated. Kyle Kuzma is kind of a bum. I mean, what did they really give up here? They didn't give up much, but they took on somebody else's problem. It's a huge contract. And my point is that yes, look, I understand that a lot of people think that you just put three max players together and it just works. And the truth is, it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't just work. I'm gonna tell you something. Miami initially wanted Carmelo Anthony instead of Chris Bosh. That initial thing was it was going to be Melo, Wade, and LeBron, right? But Melo signed that extra year of security because he didn't know if it was going to work out, and he ended up stuck in Denver. And Chris Bosh ended up being the guy. And I think they were also thinking about Amari Stoudemire. Amari Stoudemire was the other option there for them. That didn't work out either. I'm going to tell you right now, if it was Amari or Carmelo, they don't win two championships. They don't win two championships
They
because
probably
the
win one.
skills they might win one, but they're not going to
Yeah.
win two because the way that Bosh slid into that third role, that third player role, the fact that he was unselfish, the fact that he basically morphed himself into one of the best defenders in the league for that 4-year stretch, that's how they won. The fact that D Wade took a step back because of health or whatever, the fact that LeBron grew a pair, I don't know. The fact that there were all these role players that came on in the latter.
So my
that's how they
question for
won.
you is would you rather win the championship every 10 years or just be a good playoff team for every 10 years?
What are you talking about? Good playoff team for every 10 years? You mean a
Yeah,
good playoff team consistently every single year for 10 years? Or just win a championship once and then suck for 10 years?
yeah.
I don't think it works that way. I think that's a non-starter question because I don't know a single team that can just win a championship out of the blue. You can't do that. The Raptors didn't just win a championship because they had Kawhi Leonard.
So the
They won a
Lakers
championship.
before they won a championship, they were god awful for about 6 years, right? So that's where I'm alluding to. And then the
Well,
Celtics, when they
Lakers
won
are
their championship, right, with their big three, then they got old, yada yada yada. Then they had to go through this whole process again to try and get to that point again, and they finally have arrived. So that's my point. So we're like, there's these long stretches of time where you're in the finals or you win a championship, and then you like almost suck for like 4 or 5 years. Like, would you want that or be a team like the Blazers or I don't know these other teams that are always in the playoffs but can't win?
Look, I do not support being a treadmill team. If you suck, tank for a year or trade your pieces. Do what San Antonio is doing right now. Frankly, they're doing it 4 years late. Okay, they traded DeJounte Murray. They're going to go all in on the draft next year. They still have all these young players that they've developed, and Devin Vassell and all these guys that are actually good players that can possibly move for something. I like that. That's fine. Okay, I don't support this idea of basically, no offense, what the Kings are doing right now, because there's not a shred of chance in hell that De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis and Keegan Murray lead you to a championship. You have to, at some point, just realize if this.
You got to
core
make the
cannot
playoffs
grow-
before you talk about championships, though.
but you have to have a shot. Like you have to get. Look, this is an educated guess. Okay, this is me looking at this from a point of view of what has to go right for things for us to win a championship, right? For the Raptors, for instance, like with the DeMar DeRozan, Jonas Valanciunas, Kyle Lowry Raptors, what had to go right really was a LeBron injury. They were basically a LeBron injury away in all 4 years away pretty much from, and LeBron is a Superman, so he just never got injured and he just dominated. But then LeBron also lost in the finals a lot of those years, right? So it's kind of like one of those things where it's like you kept expecting DeRozan to become something, develop a three-point shot, some luck. There's always going to be luck involved in championships, always. Okay, I think the Lakers were lucky that the exact year that they traded, for Anthony Davis, but quite frankly, the entire league.
But you guys were established though, like you guys were a playoff team, right? Which is my point to you, and then you made that move. So you can't talk about the Kings winning the championship because they haven't even made the playoffs.
Well, that's the point. But do you know why it worked? It worked because we had an established culture. It worked because you traded DeMar DeRozan for
So you're saying what I'm saying. So you're saying what I'm saying. You have to.
What I'm saying is that you have to like my philosophy on team building is that you build around when you have the maximum number of years of control that is available to you. Okay? So basically Scottie Barnes right now, I think this starts, quite frankly, a new trajectory for the Raptors. Okay? Because I had this question last year too. It's like who's on whose timeline, right? Last year I was thinking like, is Scotty on Pascal and Fred's timeline, or are Pascal and Fred on Scotty's timeline? And I think that the minute Scotty Barnes came out and he showed that he was really this guy, that he was going to project out to be a superstar type of player, I think the thinking around this roster changed. A, that he's ready sooner, so we might be able to contend with Pascal and Fred. I think it's all about windows. Okay, you got to look at it from the windows perspective, and I think the most incredible example of windows would be Sacramento Kings 99 to 2004, 99 to 2003. I think you had a whole bunch of guys in that range, whether it was Stojakovic in his prime, Weber in his prime, Bibby in his prime, Vlade at the tail end, but not an overly athletic player who dominates with athleticism. You had solid bench depth. You made smart swaps. You traded Jason Williams for Mike Bibby, which was an ace move and probably one of the most underrated trades in NBA history. And you just gave yourself a shot. Every year, you gave yourself a really good shot. And it was not going to be surprising to me if a team led by Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic won an NBA championship, because that talent is sufficient. Just so happens that you ran into a juggernaut, right? You see my point? So the point here is that if you don't have Chris Webber, if you swap Chris Webber for, say, Brian Grant, and at some point you had Brian Grant instead of Chris Webber at that time, you don't have a championship window. There's really no point in making the playoffs every single year and batting out in the first round every single year. You don't have a young player who needs the experience or the reps like Scottie Barnes right now. You don't have...
So is Siakam Chris Webber in this situation?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I think Weber's a way better player than Siakam. Prime Weber was like beast. But yeah, similar level of player in terms of like consistently a top 15, top 20 type player. I think Weber in his prime is probably top 7, top 8 player. I could argue as high as top 8, top 9 for him. You know, he was a really good player, and you could win with a guy like that. He had the skill set. He didn't have necessarily the mindset, but he had the skill set to be a first option. You have to have the pieces, right? The pieces have to be there: the shooting, the depth, and it's like look at what the Boston Celtics did this year, right? They capitalized on a Chris Middleton injury and rode their ass to the finals, right? Look at what the Cleveland Cavaliers did to the Golden State Warriors. They capitalized on a Draymond suspension. These little small things have to break your way. A bounce here. Look at what the Raptors did. They capitalized on the flukiest fucking bounce in NBA history. 7 bounces. I swear to God, I wonder how people would feel about that Kawhi trade if that shot bounces out and they lose in overtime. They would say, oh my God, we gave away the superstar in DeMar DeRozan. Kawhi left. We gave up a pick. We lost Jakob Poeltl for nothing. He's one of the most impactful centers, and now Kawhi left us. But you won a championship. But when you swung for the championship, look at the Raptors' salary year over year. They have only really ever paid luxury tax once in the last 7 years. Guess which year? The year they won the championship. That was the year that they were willing to go into the luxury tax.
And that's what I want the Kings to be, though. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, you have to build that reputation, that culture, be a playoff team, and then you make that move for that Kawhi. But
let me tell you the difference.
But you can't jump from like 0 to 100 like that. Like, you have to establish that culture. And I think a lot of people that shit on the Kings don't really understand that part. It's like, they've been trying to do this shit for, like, this tanking for a long time. Like, they tanked in 09, 010, and they got Tyreek, Rookie of the Year. DeMarcus Cousins was supposed to be, obviously he was great talent, but he was shitty in the head, so they tanked. 17, they tanked. They got a top 5 pick. They got Fox. Everybody loved it. 2018, they tanked. They chose the wrong player. So it's like, you've tanked. It's now time to stop tanking, become a playoff team, establish some respect league-wide, position yourself to be what the Raptors were, win some playoff games. So I don't understand this concept of shitting on the Kings for wanting to actually win when you have a 25 and a 26-year-old where this guy's about to enter his prime, has made the All-Star team. He's an All-Star level. Let's not act like Sabonis isn't an All-Star level player. Fox is an All-Star level player. He's not. He's not.
Okay.
What?
You can consider him an All-Star level player, but when you call somebody who's made how many All-Star teams has he made? One,
two
All-Star teams.
He's 20. Okay, he's 25.
Okay.
About to be 26.
Hold on. Yeah, look, I'm not saying he's not an All-Star level player, and I apologize for correcting you on that because he is an All-Star level player. Okay, but let me tell you, like, this is a conversation that I had with the GM. And he said that sometimes we get too caught up in who makes the All-Star team and we ignore who doesn't. Every single year, according to this GM, and I completely agree, there are about 40 All-Star level players in the NBA. Every fucking year, there are 40. Okay?
Sure, I agree with
five
that.
Or six of those guys get injured. 5 or 6 of them are on really bad teams. 5 or 6 of them have like a really, really bad start. 2 or 3 of them get snubbed. 24 guys make it. At no point ever has Domantas Sabonis sniffed being a top 20 player in the NBA. Okay? Ever. He has been at best a top 25 to top 30 player, and you can look at every analytic on the planet for that. His defense just gives up way too much. Offensively, yeah, he's a top 25 player in the NBA offensively. Fox, probably a top 25, top 20 to top 30, offensive engine, whatever. But what these two guys give up defensively is a lot, okay? So if you believe that you have the pieces in place with Keegan Murray, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, I don't disagree with you. I think a play-in or a low-level playoff seed would be great. But at the very least, acknowledge where you are in the cycle, right? That's important because, yes, you have 2 young players who are still very much just kind of just starting out their prime, right? And Fox and
They're not in the prime yet. Fox is about to enter his prime.
Okay, so let's just say this year is going to be like the first start of their prime, the soft prime, hard prime, whatever, right? And you can expect that for the next 4 to 5 years, if they stick around, then you can build an organizational culture around 2 guys that you think
that's
and
the goal.
Probably most, right? And if Keegan Murray can pop, right, and if a couple of late draft picks can pop or whatever, a couple of smart signings, maybe a smart trade at the right time, then yeah. But my question is, can Fox be the best player on a championship contender? Have I ever seen a championship contender that had a first option who was anywhere near Fox's level? I think that's a question you have to ask yourself at some point before you throw the chips, because I think that's a question that I was asking for the Raptors to ask themselves with DeMar DeRozan. Every year, a lot of smart Raptor fans were like, this is not the guy. You can keep telling me he scores 28 points per game, but he's not the guy. In the playoffs, he's not the guy. So with Fox, maybe you get to the playoffs and he scores 37 points per game, and you're like, oh my God, he is the guy. This is the guy. The playoffs have finally unlocked Fox. He's really like this amazing guy.
But because you were a playoff team, you were set up to make a Kawhi trade. So the Kings can't be in that situation until they get to that situation. So if Fox gets bounced the next 3 years in the playoffs, that's fine. Like, someone's going to need his services, just like someone needed, DeMar, and how DeMar, took another step this year, whether you agree with that or not. Like, it doesn't matter. It's like, you have to get to that point.
If you're a good playoff performer, if you're a good playoff performer, it can boost your value so much. Look at what just happened with Jalen Brunson, right? Look what just happened to all the role players on the Warriors. Like, they all got paid. Well, I mean, they deserve to get paid. Gary Payton Jr., Gary Payton III and Otto Porter are awesome players, and they were a huge part of why the Warriors were so good last year. And I think the Warriors, avoiding the tax, are going to regret letting those 2 guys go. But knowing the Warriors, they're going to find a way to replace them with somebody. But
they did. They just replaced them with Dante.
I think Dante is worse than both the guys they let go of. But anyways, so my point is that, look, like if you believe that, I just think that you need to have one guy that you're batting on, like having that top end upside. Now, if it's Keegan Murray,
who were you guys batting on then when you had Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan?
Well, they were batting on DeMar and Kyle together being good enough, right?
There you go.
With the ancillary pieces that were in place, Serge Ibaka. I mean, people forget there was a point in history.
There you go.
Where the Magic do you remember the Magic gave up Domantas Sabonis plus Victor Oladipo plus picks for Ibaka at one point? Do you remember that trade? That actually happened. So the Raptors had that guy pretty much on the bench during that that title run from 2016 to 2018 where they kept getting bounced. It's not like they were delusional. They just had a guy who just kept coming up short in DeMar DeRozan.
But
And quite
Sabonis was a
frankly, like,
rookie when that happened, though. Like, he was getting drafted in 2016.
fair enough, he was a rookie, and that's no shade on Sabonis, but I'm just saying, like, that's the kind of value of Serge Ibaka. Well, I mean, that's overvaluing Serge Ibaka back then, but that's the point, that the Raptors had that type of player, and they were smartly able to swap Terrence Ross for him to the Magic when the Magic realized that he didn't fit. And what I'm saying is, like, okay, like, let's say, let's say we're at next off season, we're talking about the Kings, and the Kings have just made a really competitive first round series as an 8th seed or a 7th seed against the team. They pushed it to 6 or maybe 5, 6, whatever, and your players did well. Keegan Murray looked good, De'Aaron Fox looked good, this whole chemistry thing worked. Now you're a very different situation. You've shown, you've shown some competence. Maybe you have a coach that sticks around for more than a year or two. Maybe you have a general manager that's starting to command some respect around the league, and maybe Fox is just happier being there, and he's just happier with his teammates. And Keegan Murray looks like an emerging star, and maybe he doesn't. And the point is, at that point, as long as you have your picks in place and you've done a good job developing, your role players on the bench and your younger players and your talent pipeline, which is what the Raptors do such a great job of, right? So that those guys can step into place, right? Now you might be a 3 picks plus Keegan for a superstar type of trade away, or a Domantas Sabonis plus 3 picks for the next superstar who becomes available, because you've not only elevated the value of your own roster, but you've also demonstrated.
That's what they're banking on.
Well, let's hope. But my point is, like, with the Raptors, like, one thing I would say, like, and I wish, like, I hope this NBA thing works out for me at some point. Like, I really do get into a front office and, like, run a front office, because I'll tell you, observing the Raptors has been the greatest masterclass in front office structure, because I saw, and by the way, it didn't start with Masai Ujiri. This started with Tim Lewicki, and it started with Brian Colangelo, and it started really this transition from joke of a franchise, which the Raptors were from before 2005, trading Vince Carter for, like, nothing. Mm-hmm. This is what the Raptors were. They flubbed. They screwed up first round picks. They let free agents walk. They signed players who had no business, earning money, to, like, terrible deals. Honestly, everything you're going through as a Kings fan, I think every Raptor fan went through that between 1999 and, apart from, like, drafting Tracy McGrady and Vince Carter, like, every trade was short-sighted. Signing Hakeem Olajuwon before you really had a chance, it's just stupid trades, and then paying him to stay at home. One thing I realized is that, I had a conversation with Tim Lewicki. He did you know who Tim Lewicki is, yes? Okay, so
what does he work for?
Tim, he was initially working for the Los Angeles Lakers before MLSE, which is the Raptors ownership group, poached him away because he wanted more control, and then he raised hell. So the first order of business for him was get rid of Brian Colangelo and bring back Masai Ujiri. But even prior to that, what I'm saying is that I had a conversation with him outside of a conference that I attended of his at Ryerson, and he was talking about all the things that are free. He said all these things that are free. And he kept talking about these things that are free. And I asked him to elaborate on it later. And he said, assistant coaches, scouting departments, training facilities, player, all of these things.
I just got Rico Hines, by the way. Shout out to Rico Hines. Have a lot of fun in Canada, man. You'll love it there. Obviously, he has ties to Earl Watson. So it made a lot of sense.
Pascal Siakam. Yeah,
Pascal
exactly.
Siakam, yes.
So every single one of these things, like your strength and conditioning coach, these are the things that change. So when Tim got here, he noticed that MLSE was penny pinching on everything. And he said, look, if you guys are not willing to invest the time, I'm not willing to invest the time. You're going to have to open up your wallets on this, that. You're going to have to restructure the OVO Center. You're going to have to reinvest. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to buy your own G League team. No more sending players to the Erie Bayhawks. We have to buy our own G League team. We have to play them here. It's going to make a difference. And it's difficult to convince ownership that's trying to meddle, and then they're asking for everything. I'm not saying Vivek Ranadive is cheap. I don't have no idea. I've never met the man. But if you don't have an ownership group that understands that all of these little things add up to things, it's gonna, because you know what, reputation carries. Okay,
he's not cheap. He's very impatient.
He's impatient, and the truth is that the great teams, the great organizations. If you look at the Warriors, they have had three different versions of this team around Steph, Clay, and Draymond win a championship. There's the Harrison Barnes version, the Kevin Durant version, and now the Andrew Wiggins version. Right? Those are the three. It's like it's but what's the consistent? Steve Kerr, the
Talent.
coach, is still there. The GM is still there. The ownership is willing to
Top
spend
10
money.
player of all time helps.
But talk to any player who's ever played for the Golden State Warriors, and they'll tell you what an A-class organization that is. They're from their athletic facilities to how they travel, and then they don't realize how great they have it in Golden State or in Toronto until they go and play for a team like Orlando, or until they go and play for a team like, no offense, like not Sacramento, but like some there are some teams out there that just they cut all the costs on the fringes, right? And I think that's where you start building a great winning culture, by prioritizing all those small things that help you win. Because if you're a player, you're going to work harder if you know that your training facility is up to date and you have all the state of the art equipment. You're going to work harder if you know that your team actually went out and splurged on the best health and coaching, a training staff for you, or the best machinery, or the best assistant coaches and the development coaches for you. Every player, every undrafted player who comes here, from Justin Champagnie now this year to Ron Harper Jr., they're not coming here to make money. I mean, that's part of it. But Ron Harper Jr., I mean, his dad's an NBA player. He's good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're coming here to get better. They're coming here because they know, whether they're the 15th man, 16th man, 17th man, that the Raptors are going to push so many resources into making them better. And you know what? The Raptors approach every single situation from that perspective. And that's why you've never heard of Raptors, the front office, having an issue with Clutch Sports. Yeah, because we have three of their clients. Coloco is their client, OG is their client, Trent's their client. We have three of their clients. Imagine a team with three Clutch clients that has zero drama, right? That's pretty amazing. But you look at it from the perspective: how do you sell this to Clutch? How do you sell a 3-year contract for Coloco instead of a 2-year contract? You say, we're going to invest in him. He's going to get better, and we're going to make him a guy who can command a $25 million contract. What we don't do is we don't bury guys, not develop them so that we can underpay them later. We always fairly pay our guys, right? So when you develop a reputation of that, you have that organizational culture from the top down, from Masai to Bobby, right down to the training staff. Everything's A-class. Agents suddenly don't care about crossing borders as much. I'm not saying we're ever going to be a top destination team or beat out like LA or Miami or New York, but it's pretty close to saying like we're approaching a point where players really aren't too concerned about playing in Toronto anymore. And that's just because of the organizational culture. If we had the type of if we had the type of organizational stability that the Chicago Bulls even have right now, we would be nowhere. Like it wouldn't work. We have to be an A-class organization, and we are.
Yeah,
and that's I think what I hope.
That's my point. Like, y'all were the Kings, like you said, and the Kings are trying to be you guys now. It's that simple.
Yeah, it starts with culture drivers, so it starts with making smart draft picks. Because look, every player on your team is constantly observing what their team is doing. And if you're the team that's always getting clowned on for your draft picks, those players hear that. And if you're the team that's always promising guys that they're going to stick around, and those guys want to stick around, and then you trade them for do you know what I mean? Like, that shit, it hurts your locker room. It hurts the perception around the league. Guys talk. This is a fraternity. There's 450 players in the NBA. And if you do something to one of them, all 450 know within minutes, right?
That's right.
Like, that hurts. So if you're an organization that's not going to act that way, you're not going to be an A-class. You're not going to like, for instance, like look what the Raptors did with Kyle Lowry, right? They dealt him. They held off on dealing him, even though they were tanking. They allowed him to sit, and then they allowed him to go to the team that he wanted to go to. You don't think the Raptors could have gotten more than Precious Achiuwa for Kyle Lowry? And they took on, of course they could have. They could have traded him to the highest bidder. But how does that look to the NBA and all these other players that you traded this guy? And no offense, but that's what I'm saying. If the Kings had Kyle Lowry, they would have dealt him to the highest bidder. That's the difference. That's the difference. You build that, because it's like, okay, well, we're going to get rid of this guy, whatever, he doesn't want to be here. He's being paid $33 million. We don't want to pay him, so let's just deal him. But then every other player in the league says that's what they did to their longest tenured player. they just dealt him to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Do you know what I mean?
I agree.
It doesn't always haunt you, but sometimes it does.
So let's go over some of the signings before we end the show. Just to recap for the people that might come on and they just heard us rambling about things. We already recapped Kevin Durant going to the Raptors. There's certain deals that Robert and I agree and disagree with. He doesn't want to blow it up or give up too much. Then you won't be a contender. So I get your perspective. We saw today that the Boston Celtics finally added their point guard, not Marcus Smart, but an actual guy that can play make and score at a high level when he's healthy is a key word, and that's Malcolm Brogdon. What did you think about that move? Because I thought it was exceptional.
I think Brad Stevens is a top 5 coach in the NBA. He might be a top 3 executive. He's
funny.
amazing. He's really good. And I think that was a really good deal for them. Like, I mean, going from Danny Ainge to Brad Stevens is night and day in terms of how they value picks. Like, I swear to God, like there should be a meme out there of Brad Stevens saying, "You get a pick. No, you get a pick." They gave up a pick for Derek White. I think they gave up two picks. Did they give up 2 picks for Derek White or 1?
I think it was
I believe
one.
It was 2. It might have been 2. But if it was 1, then they've given up.
See, that's how I
think,
though. Brogdon. I mean, that's literally how I think. It's like go give me a player. Like these picks are only valuable if you're just a bad team. Like to me. People are like, oh my God, you gave up a first-round pick for Derek White. I was like, yeah, they're trying to win things. Like,
yeah, but these are protected picks. Number one, they gave up that Derek White pick. I believe they gave up that Derek White pick when they already knew that their team was turning it around and they needed that extra piece. Now, granted, Danny Ainge may not have made that trade.
He don't make that trade.
But that's my point. So,
my point is, will that number 15 pick or number 30 pick be as good as Derek White in 3 years? I always ask myself that question. That's how I know.
You don't know because you know what?
If you're a betting man, I'm going to bet that he's not going to be better than Derek White.
How good is Derek White? Look, the point was that he wouldn't be better.
Derek White,
he
was like one of the big reasons why they were so good in the playoffs. Like, let's not kid ourselves.
He was also one of the biggest reasons they were so bad. Look, he was inconsistent as how. Like, I'm not going to rate
in the playoffs.
Yeah, look, like the Raptors, like it's like there's a way to value draft picks, which I think like people don't fully understand. Like, when you give up unprotected picks, you're basically giving up a hedge against your own success. It's kind of weird, right? Because anything could happen. Teams fall apart. Like we have seen. Look at those picks that Brooklyn gave. You know, and you can go back in hindsight and say like, oh my God, the Brooklyn Nets, gave up way too much for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce because they're way past their prime. But go and actually read the reports at the time, right? Everyone said, hey, man, this guy is going all in for the super team. And it's great. It's great. Those picks are all going to be really terrible. And what did those picks turn into? Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. Okay. The current core, the superstars that are carrying the Boston Celtics to the NBA Finals are basically from the Brooklyn Nets, right? So, and then now the Brooklyn Nets are probably going to build Houston's future or, some other team's future as well. So it's a strange place to be if you're the Nets and, sorry, what were we talking about here? We were talking about picks, right? And then the value of picks.
I just feel like sometimes we put too much value onto picks. Now today, and obviously every situation needs to be looked at differently. Like that to me wasn't that big of a deal, and people always want to make it a big deal. The Rudy Gobert deal is just different to me. Like they're unprotected. Like,
yeah,
sure. I just don't think everything's black and white. Is my point.
No, it's not. And look, the Raptors have given up a lot of picks in first round picks. They almost always give them up 1 year at a time. They almost always give them up either the same year, so they already know it's not going to be super high, and they almost always attach a protection to it. So what happened with the Raptors this year is they went on a huge run, right? Initially, they weren't in the playoff race. They were barely in the play-ins, and then they went on this huge run, and then they dealt this pick for Thad Young because they wanted his bird rights, and they thought that, hey, like we'll get the second rounder. The guy that they were targeting initially is Peyton Watson and Christian Coloco. They got one of those guys. Those were the 2 guys they were targeting at 20. They got him at 33. So they looked at it as a win-win. I don't know if they do that trade without the 33rd pick or the Detroit pick coming back. So I see it as like, look, if you're the Boston Celtics, this is a great move. Grading this Malcolm Brogdon thing. This is the one guy, the one player archetype that you really didn't have, which was a pure point guard, or you call it a pure point guard facilitator. It's not, they didn't lose in the finals because they couldn't stop Golden State. They stopped Golden State. Steph Curry was great, but they held Golden State.
Yep.
Like, they clamped. Okay. What happened was they couldn't score. They couldn't get into their
100%.
offense, right? Jason Tatum is not a point guard. He's not a point forward. For all the great things that I've said about him, and you know how high I am on Jason Tatum, he's not.
Both of us
he's
are
not,
high, yeah.
Yeah, he's exceptionally, but he's not Luka Doncic, right? That player type, like that stuff, it will never come. By the way, this is not something I've ever seen a player just develop. Like, I saw Kawhi get better as a passer. But Kawhi can't run your offense like LeBron. He's never going to be able to do that, right? So I think this is great. Look, if you're the Boston Celtics, I think this is a great move because you have a title window here. You have a title window here. You don't know how long it's going to be open.
What'd you give up though? Like, you didn't give up anything. Like you gave him potato chips and like a Diet Coke.
So you say that you didn't give up anything, right? But when you get to a point where another star becomes available, like let's say for instance,
what they gave up though?
They gave up a first round pick, right? And
who cares? Like, these picks are going to be from 25 to 30 in the next 3 years.
Right, and I'm not against that. I think that's a great thing. What I'm saying is that if at the All-Star break, let's say for instance, right, at the All-Star break, the Boston Celtics are really, really great, and there's a player who, like Zach LaVine, not Zach LaVine, let's say, who's a really great point guard who could potentially demand a trade. Name one. Name a great point guard who could demand a trade. Fred VanVleet, okay? DeJounte Murray. Let's say this whole thing in Atlanta doesn't work out, right? And you're the Boston Celtics, and you have the option of now giving up this package that you just gave up for Malcolm Brogdon and attaching 3 first-round picks instead of 1 and getting back DeJounte Murray. Now you can't do that because you gave up everything you had for Malcolm Brogdon. Now, the question here is, does Malcolm Brogdon...
No, really, they only gave up 1.
Well, they gave up 1, but now that 1 is not available, so you can't give it up again. And because of the Stepien rule, you can't give up the subsequent 1. So once you start giving up your future assets, even if you give up only 1. So let's say for the Raptors, why are the Raptors in the Brooklyn Nets hunt for Kevin Durant? Why? Because they have all their picks. If the Raptors were missing if the Raptors were missing 2023, they would be out of it right away. Why? Because the earliest pick they can offer is 2025, 2027, 2029. And there's always going to be another team out there that's in the same range that can still offer 2023. So if you take yourself out of it and they offered up to, I believe it's 2023 that they gave up, right? So if they give up 2023 for Malcolm Brogdon, I don't think it's a bad move. If that's your guy, that's your guy. And you have enough pieces in place. I worry about Al Horford. My biggest concern for this Boston Celtics thing is this might have been the year that Al Horford is just, he's god level. Like, he was so good for them. He was at times their second best player, at worst their third best player for almost every single series. If you look at the series as a cumulative whole, Marcus Smart wasn't great, so you can bank on Rob Williams taking a step up as a defender. Honestly, without Al Horford, I don't know what you do. So if there's another couple of years of Al Horford, or at least one more year of Al Horford, I think this is a calculated gamble. It's low risk, high reward, and the reward is a championship.
They gave up Daniel Tice, Aaron Nesmith, and Nick Stauskas. Shout out to Nick Stauskas, number 8 pick for the weak-ass Kings. Malik Fitz, Juwan Morgan, and they gave up nothing.
Absolutely. They gave up all these pieces that don't play for them, and they added Malcolm Brogdon for what is effectively nothing, right? But what I'm saying is Malcolm Brogdon has had a very, very, very serious injury history, and he's on the wrong side of 30 as well, okay? And he hasn't actually been great for like the last 2-3 years, and he hasn't played great defense, by the way, since he left Milwaukee. If you've actually watched Malcolm Brogdon play, and you're not just remembering him from his time in Milwaukee, you realize that this is not the same Malcolm Brogdon. Now, there's a reason why he was so cheap, because he's owed quite a bit of money over the next 2-3 years, if I'm not mistaken. If you look at his salary,
well, they're going through a full rebuild, though. I mean, it's more of them Just
Look, they dumped Malcolm Brogdon's salary, okay, because there isn't a huge market out there for him right now. And if I'm not mistaken, there's not a single team other than the Celtics who would have traded for him right now. Name me another team that was going to offer you anything for him right now, given his injury concerns, given his cap hit, and how much and it's one of the deepest positions in the league. So I'm not. Look, I
yeah, but
get
he
it from
can play
both
the off
sides.
guard too, though. It's not like he's like a one trick pony. Like he can, like he's a good enough shooter to play the off guard.
He is a good enough shooter to play the off guard. He is no longer, however, a good enough defender where you can say to yourself, this guy is a plus defender. He is an average defender at best, and he is a guy who might play 35 to 50 games for you on an average season. So now you're hoping, A, that you made it to the playoffs and to the finals without this guy. So you're taking a risk here, if you're the Celtics, that this guy is healthy for the playoffs next year,
That's
that he
all I
can give you
want
the
if I'm the
one.
Celtics.
Sure, and I would argue that you probably these guys they don't grow on trees. Okay, there might be like 30 point guards in the league, 35 point guards, maybe 30 point guards, maybe 25 point guards in the league who give you this type of offensive upside in terms of playmaking, right? It's a player type and a skill that they were desperately lacking, and they filled it. So I would give the Celtics an A, but I would also give the Indiana Pacers for getting off that contract an A as well. I think both teams won this trade
Because of where they're at. I mean, sure. I mean,
because of where they're at and because of where he's at. Like Malcolm Brogdon is just not that great a player.
Oh,
He's
yeah. I
not
mean,
a top 25 point guard in the NBA. You gave up a first round pick for him. I think that's fair.
they drafted Matherin, and they got Tyrese, and they got Chris Duarte. Like they were trying to just
Matherin's a 2-3. I think moving off of him is because they drafted Andrew Nembhard with the 31st pick, and they have really high hopes for him, that he can actually play right away, and he's a seasoned college player, and he has a lot in common actually with Malcolm Brogdon. So I just think like they just want to get younger and move off. So I'm kind of curious.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Atlanta trading Kevin Huerter to Sacramento for Justin Holiday, more Harkless, a first-round pick. It was a 2024 lottery protected first-round pick to the Hawks. Because top 12, and then it's 25, blah, blah, blah. The Kings wanted to get better, more versatile on the wings, and do that with Huerter and free agent Malik Monk. Both will play next season at 24 years old and fit into the age timeline of Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. And on top of that, they add close to 40% shooting from the perimeter, which is what the Kings needed in terms of offensive versatility. They got that in him. They lost shooting with
contract. What's his contract?
14, 15, 16, 17. Next 4 years.
Okay. Yeah, like look, I'm a buyer on him. I actually like him probably more than most people. I think he's really talented.
You like him more than me. Yep.
I do, and I think we've already talked about this at some point, right? Like in our DM, in our conversations. Like I like him more than most people because he's a good passer. I like that, and he's a multi-positional defender, which is I think the type of.
He's not a good defender, but I mean, he's
versatile.
He tries hard.
He's not a great
he
defender.
tries hard.
I mean, it's average. Like he's a league average defender who has like a lot of skills that could pop, and he's still young enough.
Kenyon said he's closer to a negative than he is to a positive defender.
As what? As a defender?
Yes. Analytically speaking.
Analytically speaking, I would be curious to see that because
check those numbers out real fast. Let's go over some of the other news as well, some of the other deals. Obviously, we talked about Kevon Looney signed a 3-year, $25 million to stay with Golden State. They love him, blah, blah, blah. And then we had the big Utah trade. And then the Jazz have gathered 6 first-round picks in the last 24 hours, including 7. Dante signed with the Warriors. So the Warriors got Looney and Dante DiVincenzo back. They weren't going to pay a lot of money for Gary Payton Jr. there. Let me see.
Okay, so in terms of Huerter, right? Mm-hmm. He's a 65th percentile offensive player. His greatest strengths are his shot diet. So basically, like how he generates offense in terms of like the shot selection. He shoots a lot of threes, which is good. The the fact that he has a lot of creation, portability. He fits into a lot of different lineups, so that gives you a lot of. So he can be an off-ball spacer, he can be off the ball shooter. There's a lot of different ways that he can play. So at a 65th percentile crafted offensive plus minus, he's a solidly above average player at the age of 24. And in terms of defense, the only thing that really holds him back, per the analytics, is his rim defense because he's not overly athletic or long. So his rim defense, again, this is something that a lot
What's
of guards.
What's his perimeter defense like?
His perimeter defense is solid, like 62nd percentile on deflections, 61st percentile on defensive rebounds, and that's league wide. So that's a very above average rebounder for a guard. If you're playing him as a guard, and as a forward, he's the really the only issue.
So are
with
you
him
starting
right now,
Kevin Huerter over Malik Monk?
I think it's a competition. I think you could sell yourself on either, and maybe some internal competition isn't the worst thing. I don't think one of them is necessarily drastically better than the other. And you get two guys who sort of fit. Look, like I think between Keegan and Huerter and Malik Monk, you have three pieces that win basketball games.
They shoot the ball well, which is what you need around Fox and Sabonis.
Number one, they shoot the ball well. Number two, they're smart players. All of them are smart players. Keegan Murray is an extremely smart player. Huerter is a really smart player, and I'm not just saying that because he's a white guy who went in the lottery. He is actually really, really smart. He is actually a really smart player, and if you actually watch him play, you can tell that he's extremely well coached. And, if the analytics don't love him on defense, it's largely just because he doesn't provide anything at the rim. He doesn't provide any shot blocking or anything like that. And that's sort of why the analytics love Jalen Suggs, because he's a shot blocker. You see what I mean? So the analytics can sometimes skew towards a guy who has a particular defensive role, but it's not like the Atlanta Hawks were funneling guys towards Kevin Huerter to block shots when they had Onyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella in there. I mean, they have a team that funnels guards. So his role was different. I mean, maybe with the Sacramento Kings, you'll see better at rim defense from him. I see the upside. I buy the upside. If the Raptors had traded for him to shore up their bench, which is something that I would have been all over, I would have been very happy. I think he's a good player.
Who do you think's a better player, Kevin Huerter or Gary Trent Jr.?
I like Kevin Huerter Jr., even though I know that Gary Trent Jr. is a better player. Yeah, I like him more because of his unselfishness, because of his portability, because he's not a chucker, because everything I hate about Gary Trent Jr. is what I love about Kevin Huerter. So I like Kevin Huerter more, but I know Gary Trent Jr. is a better player. He's a better defender, and he's definitely a better creator offensively. Like, he's not a creator for others, but in terms of isolation scoring, which is probably one of the most sought-after skills, it's really why Kevin Durant is worth what he's worth, okay? Kevin Durant right now, isolation scoring is his bread and butter. Gary Trent Jr. is not he's not like the most efficient isolation scorer in the NBA, but he was by far the most efficient isolation scorer on the Raptors last year, and he can get a shot off anytime he wants, and he's 23 years old. He's a year younger. He really picked it up defensively. Yeah, I don't like Gary Trent Jr. because I don't like his brand of basketball, but I think he's a better player.
By a lot or by like a smidge? You love Kevin Huerter. I mean, I'm just excited that you actually like him. Like, that's pretty dope because you like him more than I do.
I don't love him. I love the fit. I love the fit.
Yeah, I mean the fit's good.
You have a ball dominant like there was a draft day analyst who probably should probably jump off a bridge who at one point said that Kevin Huerter teaming up with Trae Young, oh my God, Atlanta's got their Steph and Clay, right? Now, that draft analyst, by the way, has been clowned forever for that. But you know what? The comparisons to Klay Thompson were not ridiculous. Now, obviously, they're ridiculous in the sense of comparing him, but the player type, his style of basketball,
6'7", Yeah, shot, like very similar.
Exactly.
Like
He moves. He moves with the
yeah.
basketball. He passes. He doesn't chuck up stupid shots. He's like one dribble pull up guy. Like I just like his efficient brand of offense, and I understand why Atlanta would move on from him because they have a glut of wings and they have a backcourt starter and DeJounte Murray now. But I like him as a complementary piece. There are certain guys like Otto Porter Jr. that the Raptors just signed today, where you're like, that guy, every time he's on the court, is going to make everyone else better. He has gravity. He moves. He makes smart passes. He makes good deflections. Otto Porter just does all the small things that make you help you win basketball games. Kevin Huerter is not Otto Porter Jr. in terms of impact offensively or defensively. I think Otto Porter Jr. is like a 90th percentile defender and like a 73rd percentile offensive player. So he's like leaps and bounds. But he's 24 years old. He could grow. He's ideal. If he was a slightly better defender, he would be the ideal fit next to De'Aaron Fox. Maybe you can coach him up defensively. There's a lot of players out there who just haven't played great defense. Maybe not playing next to a pylon like Trae Young. If everyone on the Kings can get better, maybe this is a guy who can help you. I don't know.
No, he's gonna help. And just to clarify, for people, it's like, and I went on Twitter, and at first I was just upset because of. Not because I think that pick will be better than Kevin. I think Kevin's a fine player. It's just they just kind of removed themselves from adding a third level all-star type player like a Sabonis, like a Fox, because now you can't give up that pick, right, in 2024 because it's protected and there's a bunch of, obviously you can renounce it and just say, here's my pick, whatever. But it makes things a lot more complicated because of the step-in rule and because of all these CBA stuff. That's why I was upset. Not because they got Kevin. I mean, they needed shooting and they needed defense. They addressed both those things by adding close to 40% shooters next to Fox's bonus. So I love that. But they still need defense. Can they trade for Thibault? I would love that. Can they, sign a low deal on a Josh Okogie, who is great defensively but just can't shoot to save his life? Can he teach someone how to shoot? Maybe. I would go after Martin Twin. I don't think they would take the biannual exception because that's all they have, and like about $1 million left for the MLE. So, can you get a Martin Twin? That would complete my offseason. I don't know if they take a deal to come to the Kings, and I'm just being realistic.
Yeah, well, maybe if this whole experiment doesn't work out, you still have assets, right? Now you have assets. Like Kevin Huerter is an asset. Keegan Murray is an asset. Domantas Sabonis is an asset. You're not and they're not depreciating assets. They're all actually really reasonably priced assets. Like for Kevin Huerter, this is a guy who can come in on any contender and be the first or second guard off the bench. And I think there's a lot of contenders that would see the value in that. So the pick that you gave up, if this doesn't work out, you get that back, no problem, right? And that's the pick that you swap in, right? So let's say we get to the trade deadline and you realize that, oh my God, we really, Fox is not picking it up defensively. We really do need a Matisse Thybulle level defender next to him just to shore up some of the issues that we have between him and Sabonis. Well, then guess what? Now you can trade Huerter and you can reset on that basically by, saying, hey, we'll take back a filler or an expiring, but we want a 2024 pick or a 2020. Yeah. So, and then now you're back at square one, right? Because now you have, contract plus all your future picks. And now if you want to swing for, a really, really good two guard or center or whatever you want to plug in, now you have that 2024 pick plus 2026 plus 2028, and then just
they do have 2023, so
but you can't move 2023 because you already traded 2024. That's a step-in rule.
Step-in rule. Yep. God diggity.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, man, thank you guys so much for joining. We're an hour and a half in, about an hour and 40 minutes. We talked largely about the Raptors, how they build rosters, should they trade for KD. It'll be interesting. I think it gets decided in the next 48 hours. I really do. And then once that piece falls, I think the rest of these role players that haven't signed, like the TJ Warrens, the Martin Twins, like the Koji's, they'll start to sign their deals. But yeah, man, Robert, appreciate you coming in as always. We'll have you and Kenny them for sure. Hopefully soon we if we can all get on the same page and talk some more Raptors basketball. If you guys haven't already liked the podcast, make sure you guys do.
And if you've made it this far, go and check out, if you're curious about the draft, go and check out my hour and a half video breaking down.
I watched
all
one part
58 picks.
and that was a Kings part. I've yet to talk to you about it, but what I want to do with that part is I want to play it and go live and then just kind of discuss what you said. And then we'll go from there. But
yeah, we'll look into it. I mean, it picked up in Steam. I'm just so stupid. I took 5 days to make that video because I really there's like 6 or 7 players in the draft that I had never seen more than 2 games of, and I'm like, I don't want to talk out my ass about these players and give them a grade if I don't know, because everyone just does that. They're just like, oh, it's a B, it's okay, you know. I wanted to really research it, and then by the time I released the video, it was like 4 days after the draft. We were already almost into free agency, so it got about 2,000 views. But you know, I hope it picks up. I hope draft. I mean, I'm curious to look back on it a year from now. I was so low on Paolo, and that could blow up my face so quick.
He's pretty good.
But I took. My point is, like, I took my perspectives. Like, I had a perspective. I didn't just like give everyone B's or whatever. Like, I have a real position on this. Like, I really do think certain guys are gonna pop and certain guys are gonna flop. So we'll see what happens. But yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I appreciate you guys as always. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.